Boxing, the original African martial art. Boxing is the world's oldest martial art and is ubiquitous among all nations and peoples, most famously the ancient Greeks and Romans, whereas modern boxing is credited to the British. Africa is the mother of boxing, and her children's dominance of the sport is infamous. Yet, in the conversation of its creation, they are often left out. So, in this video, I want to show you that the sweet science of hitting and not getting hit was largely invented and innovated by people of African descent. And indeed, what karate is to Japan, boxing is to the black man. African invention. Boxing was first invented in Africa. This is not to say that other peoples didn't contribute any innovations. In fact, we owe the boxing gloves, the ring, and rules to several non black people. However, the science of hitting and not getting hit was first started by people who had quite some time under the sun to perfect it. By the time the first non African civilization recorded boxing, Africans had already been competing. There was regular competition in boxing and wrestling between the Nubians, the Canaanites, and Egyptians, as they shared religious festivals. I covered this in my ancient boxing series. Wrestling, with over 6,000 moves, was codified in Africa over 2,000 years before the Greeks came out of the Dark Ages. Wrestling is complex. Boxing is scientific simplicity with one rule: hit and don't get hit. Reason would dictate boxing in its entirety would have been perfected a long time ago in Africa, especially if they could perfect wrestling, which would explain the large African dominance in the sport of boxing, despite being a minority. Black style.
Black fighters fight in a style that is not pleasing to the fans, let's just say, and that's why they don't sell.
Boxing is the sweet science of hitting and not getting hit. And while all black fighters don't fight in the same style, no one embodies this principle more than the black boxer. So much so that this style of hitting and not getting hit has been considered almost derogatorily as the black style. It's a stereotype in boxing that black fighters fight in a particular style. That style is hitting and not getting hit. That style is the definition of boxing. When Floyd Mayweather, Devin Haney, Shakur Stevenson, and other black boxers do this, they call it running. But when Lomachenko, Tyson Fury, and many others do this, it's called having a high boxing IQ. They try to shame you into not using this skill. Some say that black fighters have great footwork because they've got an extra bone in their leg. Or they'll say things like they're just naturally gifted or they're naturally athletic. Or you'll hear when a non-black fighter is fighting, they'll say he's one of the hardest workers. He's a hard worker. One of the most egregious things I've heard was they've got negroids, so we've got steroids. This is a sentiment that has been expressed in the boxing world as a justification for non-black fighters taking steroids. They see it as evening the playing field. There are actually a variety of boxing practices found throughout Africa, but most of these forms of boxing include wrestling and kicking. as fighting with only your hands only came about officially through the Marquess of Queensberry rules, which is what made modern boxing official. However, there are styles in Africa that emphasize striking with your hands. Kandaka. Kandaka is one such style from Africa where they only fight with their hands. In Kandaka, the goal is to hit and not get hit, except you're hitting with open hands. So Kandaka is actually slap boxing. But one of the biggest takeaways from Kandaka is the footwork and evasive skills, even in close proximity. Asafo Atwele. Asafo Atwele is a martial art from Ghana that, while it is kickboxing, they do have two distinct separate styles where some practitioners focus mainly on hands, while others focus mainly on kicks. But eventually, through British influence, the kicking aspect eventually fell out of favor. Morenge. Morenge is another kickboxing art that's very similar to capoeira, depending on which region of East Africa it's being practiced in. But Morenge, just like Asafo Atwele, punching and kicking, with some aspects of Merengue focusing on acrobatic kicking, while the other focuses on punching. Musangwi. Musangwi is an East African bare knuckle boxing art that goes back hundreds of years, but was officially codified in the 1800s. Although some kicks are allowed, practitioners mainly fight with their fist. There's also Lam in Senegal, which is primarily a wrestling art, but they do use punches, especially in the clinch. And of course, we can't forget about the infamous Dambe, which is another boxing art that is unique to the Hausa people of Nigeria. Check out my video on Dambe. Besides inventing the sport and the Egyptians teaching it to the Greeks, Africans have made many significant contributions to boxing. First, modern boxing is a direct descendant of prize fighting, and prize fighting was birthed originally from slave fights. These fights typically took place on Friday nights, but mostly Saturday nights. George Dixon, the punching bag. Dixon was among the first to pioneer the use of the heavy bag to develop your boxing training, either with a chain or a rope attached to a bag. Shadowboxing. Shadowboxing is a staple of any boxing training regimen, and George Dixon was the one who invented it. Dixon also wrote an early boxing manual that taught people to take a scientific approach to boxing. Techniques. The jab and the 1-2. Early in boxing, jabs were not favored because they're a very soft punch. It's a weak punch. People often swung rounded punches if you look at those old-time fighting tapes. But Joe Gans made an art out of using the jab. He developed a system with the jab. And after Joe Gans, people started recognizing the usefulness of setting up punches with a jab. He not only pioneered the jab, but Joe Gans also made the 1-2 his bread and butter. Philly shell. As the name suggests, the Philly shell was popularized by fighters from Philadelphia, specifically George Benton. George Benton was known for his incredible defense. They said you couldn't hit him with a handful of rice, and he's credited with popularizing the Philly shell. But Benton not only used this style throughout his career, but he taught it to boxers such as the great Pernell Whitaker. Footwork. While Muhammad Ali didn't invent footwork, he certainly revolutionized footwork, especially at heavyweight. And there are things that we use now that was pioneered by Ali, such as the shuffle, using your foot to get you out of danger. While footwork cannot be credited to one fighter, fighters like Ali, Mayweather, Pernell Whitaker, Sugar Ray Robinson, Sugar Ray Leonard, pretty much mostly black fighters, set the standard for footwork. Head movement. And again, while no single fighter invented head movement, black fighters are the best at it. There are many instances of slick head movement done by black fighters that are still being copied to this day. Roy Jones with his hand behind his back, leaving his face open, only to slip, make you miss by an inch and make you pay. Ali and his rope-a-dope, where he puts his back to the ropes and using only head movement make you miss every punch. Even Mayweather making his opponents miss and mockingly looking towards the stands. Legacy. Again, boxing is a sport that is ubiquitous among all nations and people. And there are many different peoples who've contributed so much to boxing. But it cannot be denied. Whenever you want to say somebody is great in boxing, you pick a legendary black fighter to compare them to. Gennady Golovkin was compared to Marvin Hagler. Canelo compared to Henry Armstrong. Naoya Inoue was just recently compared to Larry Holmes. Lomachenko, Tyson Fury, and many others have been compared to Ali. And you can't forget all the fighters who call themselves Sugar after Sugar Ray Robinson, Sugar Ray Leonard. Now we got Sugar Sean O'Malley. Every race has their own version of a Mike Tyson. I've seen at least 3 white Mike Tysons. With that being said, greatness comes in many colors. But when it comes to boxing, the legends, the standard, the comparison is the original, the pioneers and inventors of boxing, the original African martial art. Thank y'all so much for tuning in. Make sure y'all smash that like button. Leave your thoughts in the comment section. Share this video. If you want more stuff like this, you can head on over to the Patreon, a link in the description. Send a super thanks Cash App or whatever you feel like. Sliding the big man upstairs to keep the videos coming. Till next time.